Lo, there do I see my father. Lo, there do I see my mother, and my sister, and my brother. Lo, there do I see the line of my people, back to the beginning. Lo, they do call me. They bid me take my place among them in the halls of Valhalla, where the brave may live forever. This is a quote from the 13th Warrior film. It was based on an account called the Letter or Auristria from the 10th century, uh, from a uh, slave girl who was following her deceased mother into a ritual death. All right, so uh, we're going to be talking about the Vikings today. Uh, what a lovely people. They were vicious, they were tough, uh, and a lot of us throughout uh, history are fascinated with the Vikings. You know, they had their own mythology, um, Norse mythology, uh, which, and we'll talk about a little bit here in a little bit. They, were people who would just come in and they were just tough. And they would take what they wanted and kill who they wanted. So they were the people from Scandinavia. Scandinavia, you ask? Well, that is Northern Europe. It's like Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Um, and they relied heavily upon the sea. They would get in their longboats and they would sail into places and raid them. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And you can see some of the paths that the Vikings would take. And you can see here some of the here's Norway, Scandinavia, this whole area up here that they would sail out of. They came on down into Britain, Ireland, all of this. They would raid this. They would raid the coast all the way through France, Spain, even come into the Mediterranean, uh, run up into Italy. So they did a lot of uh, raiding. And you can see this map also shows you the Mygars and the Saracens. But the Vikings is who we're going to focus on. Um, and they would come in every year and do these raids. And they would take all the gold, all the riches, some of the people for slaves, uh, and they would just leave destruction behind them. And you can also see the famous trip to Iceland and on over into Greenland, and then on over into the Americas. The Vikings, some of the first to ever land here, way before Columbus ever did. Viking raids. Vikings began raiding parties of parts of Europe by boat around 400 AD. They would come in, like I said, and they would just pillage the land. They plundered and killed without discrimination. Men, women, children, uh, priests, uh, whoever, nobles, peasants, they would kill you if you stood in their way. And again, here's another map with various Viking raids and campaigns. And you can even see in that last map, you didn't see it as much, but some of them would come up north. They would go east and raid inland here uh, and into like what today is Russia and so forth. And that's important because we're about to mention the Vikings and the Slavs. And the Slavs were the people who lived in this region. Okay, the Slavs lived over here as a group of people, and when you mix the Vikings plus the Slavs, uh, when they mixed together, married, and so forth, you had the people who founded Russia. That's where you can date a lot of Russians back to. And these Vikings are very strong, very vicious, and you can tie that into this whole Russian uh, concept that we see of them. Um, and just to mention, I have these several pictures throughout this, and you'll see there's a great show, Vikings, done by the History Channel. Now, is it all historically accurate? No. Okay. But it makes a good story, and they have some really cool things they illustrate through the show. And you can see them going upon some of their raids and so forth. Um, and these Russian ones, they would make raids into Roman territory. And they were even hired as soldiers of fortune. Those who would settle there or so forth would be hired as soldiers of fortune by the Byzantine Empire, especially when the Byzantine was clashing with these others and they were in some of their weaker periods. They would hire out these Viking Slavs to come and fill in their battle ranks, kind of like Rome did with the Visigoths and so forth. Uh, some of the Vikings also settled in France. In 1000 AD, they became known as the Normans or the Northmen. Okay, and they're an area. The area they settled became known as Normandy. That is where they lived. Uh, and you can, like the World War battle, the beaches of Normandy. That's this area. Um, the Normans would later on clash, and we'll talk about that with some other groups. Around the same time, other Vikings sailed west and sailed much further west to Iceland and to Greenland, and they settled there. That's when a lot of people today think of Iceland. They think of a lot of the Viking traditions of like the Norse mythology and so forth. Um, and some even went on into Canada. They didn't stay very long there. I mentioned that they were there a long time ago. Uh, they weren't there very long. It was very rough conditions at the point, and they were very separated from all their other people. Uh, but the oceans became too icy to sail back and forth around 1300 AD, and so with their longboats, which were made of wood, they couldn't sail through this really tough ice. Um, and again, is another map to kind of show you how the Scandinavians would settle. Um, you can see, here they are in the 8th century, and then the 9th century settle on in, and they would spread out. Uh, and then you would see these areas in green are areas that they would raid a lot, but they didn't really settle much. Okay. Norse mythology. Vikings had their own religion. Uh, just like the Greeks and the Egyptians, you had, Zeus and that pantheon for the Greeks, and you had Ra and the Egyptian pantheon for the Egyptians. Um, it was thought is more focused on an aspect of warriors with their gods. Um, and here's a few just to mention. Um, the House of Odin. Odin, who was kind of the head god, sat on the throne, also known as the All-Father. Um, and sometimes he could be seen as a stranger or an old man wandering around and, missing an eye because he gave up that eye for knowledge. Um, and Odin sits on the throne of Valhalla or the throne of Asgard and rules. And one day we'll go there to Valhalla. Now Valhalla is, and well, I'll get to it when I'm down in the line. Baldur is another one of the people. Now they have the Thor movies, and you can see Thor here and Loki, which are made popular through the Marvel movies. Thor, being a son of Odin, and Molinar, which is his hammer that only Thor can lift. Um, is the god of thunder, and so he packs pretty good punch with that, and we've learned a lot more about him through the movies, though the movies do get away from the mythology somewhat. Loki, the trickster, was is a very devious god. We have Tyr, and these are some people who would stand with Thor in their fights against the dark worlds. And Valkyries, here's a Valkyrie here, would come down, and when the Vikings would have these battles, or brave men died on the battlefield, the Valkyrie would come down and take those brave, fierce warriors who earned a good death to Valhalla, where they would sit and feast all night and battle all day during the day. Uh, and if you're a big Star Trek fan, I always think of, when I think of the Klingons, I think, to me, the Klingons remind me a lot of uh, the Norse mythology, a lot of the Vikings. Today is a good day to die, and that's what they wanted, this great and noble death. Um, and you could go, Ragnarok is kind of like the apocalypse for them. All things will end at Ragnarok. Is this the battle to end all of battles? And if you're interested in Norse mythology, there's a lot of it out there. It's a very depth mythology, um, and has some really cool uh, characters in that mythology. Um, and there's a video link down there for a video. All right, so until next time, deuces.